There were three departments that were primarily going to handle the effects work for Alone in the Dark. There was a special effects crew ultimately that handled explosions and charges and car chases and things like that. There is a creature effects team which handles the build of a creature, its puppeteering and things and such on set. And then there's the visual effects crew, which are ultimately responsible for doing all the digital work once a film is finished. There was a number of matte paintings achieved for the show. One of our artists here did a beautiful matte painting behind Stephen Dorff in 713.
You know, in a lot of these films you've got the so-called FBI headquarters, that sort of thing, and we had that in Alone in the Dark, and they didn't have a budget to create this high-tech, futuristic environment where people, figure out where the bad guys are and chase them down on computers. So we built our own, and we extended a green screen shot to create the server room. What drove the concept was really they wanted this futuristic computer environment where these servers could be seen that obviously had functions. And so I went to our IT guy here and asked him, what is a futuristic looking server like? What can drive a headquarter like this and make it look realistic and fit into that environment? We had a lot of what we call GAC in the industry. And basically on everyone's computer screen we had to have graphics that looked like they were doing something intelligent and something important. And so we probably built about 15 different interfaces overall that would play on individual screens. And then we had a massive interface that played on a major screen in the film that was sort of like the control panel, if you will, for the leader, the director of the headquarters there. And behind him, that was where the server room was. And so we played back and forth on these two shots, and we would actually reflect the environment that had all the interfaces that we had put onto the monitors. We would reflect that back into the matte painting, so it even gave it more of a realistic feeling.
What are we looking at, Krasinski?
Electromagnetics off the scale, Commander. I've never seen anything like it.
The three biggest sequences that we were responsible, or shots, if you will, were the stroboscopic sequence, which is sort of a flash frame sequence in the middle of the film. The bullet time sequence, which is sort of a camera's POV in and around a bullet as it fires through and shatters ice and whatnot and finally embeds itself in our opening sequence, Bad Guy. And the final sequence would be the sandworm sequence. So we were responsible for all the creature design, development, rigging, and animation of that sandworm. The stroboscopic sequence was a challenge because everything was shot as raw elements. There was no set, there were no props, there were no real anything for the shot. And Uwe wanted a sequence that was a certain length. He wanted us to spend a certain amount of time within the shot. So we basically shot every single actor against black, all on their own, at various angles, doing various things.
So we took in all the footage of the actors against the black background with their guns and pretending to be shooting and fighting these phantom monsters. All these things we had to roto out.
Rotoscoping is a frame-by-frame drawing around of an object, be it an actor, an object of interest of some sort. So if it's not shot against a green screen or a blue screen, there's no automated way of removing that object. So that's where rotoscoping comes in. Basically, it means having to go hand draw around that object, frame by frame, for the duration of the shot. So as you can imagine, that can be a fairly tedious process if you're looking at a fairly long shot.
Once we did this, we had all the elements that we needed, and we would assemble it. And then we started deciding, okay, what do we want in the background? And we'd imagine just having pillars of this space that they were in, just things to catch light here and there to give a sense of space and depth and of where they were. And then the final touches were to add atmosphere, make it look a little bit smoky, put in muzzle flashes off the guns so they look like they're actually firing, and create, I guess, camera movements, almost like you're moving through the space.
And it was all stitched together for this 60-second sequence. There was nothing shot, there was no set, there were no camera moves. Everything you see is ultimately the work of the artist in this facility, putting together little cutouts, if you will, to create camera moves and move in and out and around, adding every single muzzle flash, adding all the tracer fire, obviously all the creatures, and any set pieces. One of the biggest sequences that we worked on in the film, from a time standpoint, was definitely the bullet time sequence. We visited weapons shops to get as accurate an outline and reference as we could for the elements themselves, being the bullet, the barrel. We sort of sought a lot of reference with respect to muzzle flashes and recoil so that we could basically depict as accurately as possible what would happen if you were directly in front of a 9mm weapon when it discharged.
There was some rig removal and rotoscoping that was involved just because the actor, the stuntman, was actually on wires. There was some time remapping involved as well because it was shot slow-mo, and then the director wanted a ramp basically into the slow-mo and then back out of it, and you can actually see that in the final shot. It starts fairly quickly, and then at the end it speeds up out of the shot.
One of the more complicated elements in the process was definitely building the ice as well. We built a large block of ice and had to create a dynamic simulation that shatters this block into literally thousands of pieces of ice. And we go through it in slow motion. So everybody in the background had to freeze while we did certain passes for this to work. And there was pretty much nothing in the plate or in the shot itself that wasn't altered in some way. From background elements to people, peripheral things. It was quite a trip, quite a journey. I think overall the shot was probably worked on for about 3 months.
One of the creatures that we were designing out here in Vancouver was called the sandworm, and it was a fairly challenging design given that it had such an animated facial expression, so we had to sort of incorporate character into the design. And we came at it from a bunch of different angles. We started on paper, we also had people modeling mock-ups in the computer, and I came at it from a sculptural point of view, actually building a clay model, and then realizing that with the time constraints we had, it was actually faster to do revisions in the computer, so I began modeling in the computer. We had a variety of approaches in the concept of it, and when we revisited in the computer to do some revisions to the modeling, we really took it to a very high resolution poly mesh for the head that actually gave it a very nice look when lit in 3D, and it did a lot of the work for us in terms of defining the forms and the different tissues and bone structures. And we actually also did like anatomical drawings of it to define which areas were going to be specified as muscle and which areas would be specified as bone. And then that rolled over into the texturing department as well.
There's a lot that goes into those. A lot of lighting, a lot of texturing, just a lot of movement things you gotta consider, animation that you have to consider. We used a couple of animals for reference in the movement. Basically snakes, obviously. Just trying to figure out how they work. Also, it's a bit of a balance because you don't want to take it too far in one direction because, they also shot practical elements, especially sliding through the sand. There's a couple of shots there where the snake is sliding through the sand, and that was a practical element, and so you can't stray too far from that.
The sequence itself is a challenge because you're having to fit the sandworm into practical elements, sand bursts and whatnot that were done 10 months prior on a soundstage somewhere. So, and the actors aren't really seeing anything, and so you have a lot of challenges in pulling it together and making it work.
Our job really is to suspend disbelief, and a lot of the times on these types of film projects that are realistic, at least to a point, your work is often unseen, and that's when you're doing the best job that you can do, and I think that is certainly what this film is all about, trying to integrate elements into elements with other elements that were disparate and came from different sources and making them look like they all belong together to sell an idea.